morning, listeners. My name is Micah.
My name's Josiah. Surprise, everybody.
Yes, and welcome to the Morning Ponderings podcast. Our goal here is to explore the possibilities of the mysteries of life so that empathy for others can flourish. And so today we've kind of got a special episode. Things are a little switched up today. Christian he's back at home now, but this week he has a new member in the family. Yes, so
Yay!
So they had their baby. Everything went really well. We are super excited for Christian and his new. Now he's got two kids. You heard his one son on one of the other podcasts in the bloopers at the very end there. But now he's got another baby in the family. So our podcast schedule might change just slightly because of that. Because now he's having to wrangle his life together a little bit. But we've got a special guest today, and his name is Josiah.
Yes, my name's Josiah. I am Micah's brother.
Yeah, crazy.
Me and Micah have been sort of aligned in a spiritual journey, I think, for a while.
Yeah.
And me and Micah live in the same city, and we're best friends. So he asked me if I could come to hang out with him on the podcast for a week, and I was like, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and we've talked about doing podcasts together, and now the day has finally come where we get to make an episode together.
Yeah, get to test the waters, right?
Yeah, sure. So we always got to start with the classic question that we always ask is, how's your morning going?
It's been pretty okay. I had some oatmeal. Currently I'm drinking some coffee. I feel like you guys give your coffee opinions a lot on this show. So I'm just going to come out and say it. I drink my coffee black almost entirely.
That's gross.
I enjoy black coffee. It was actually a health journey because I did not enjoy black coffee for a long time. First I removed creamer and I just had sugar. And then, sorry, Pearl wanted to get on my lap.
Yeah, I see.
So I used to put a lot of creamer in it, and then I stopped, and it was just sugar. And then I just put less sugar in every day for a month, and then I spent a month drinking it black. And now I like it black. And now coffee is not bad for me anymore.
Yeah.
Well, as long as I don't drink way too much of it, which I do. But we're going to ignore that. I'm proud of myself.
I just love the taste of creamer so much that it's kind of it's a tricky thing. Like, do I even try to give up creamer because it tastes so good? Like,
well, I haven't entirely given it up,
Oh, okay.
I mean, it's more of a fun thing. Like, I can go get myself I love a Frappuccino.
Okay.
We went to Scooters together. You saw what I ordered. It was a caramel blender. Like it.
Yeah.
It wasn't a black coffee.
True. Yeah, that is true.
Just for my daily drinking habits, it tends to be black. That's all.
I mean, that's good. Yeah, if you're gonna drink it all the time, probably makes it healthier.
Yeah.
Nice.
Other than that, Pearl, she's my dog. For the listeners, I have 3 dogs. One of them is Pearl. She is a Cavalier King Charles Spaniel, and she got fleas recently, and so we treated her, got everything taken care of. I think it was the cat, because we have an outdoor cat, and we used a flea, like an anti-flea thing, but I don't think it worked as well as it was supposed to.
Yeah. What do you do?
But anyway, yeah, well, she's okay now. I gave her I gave her the full treatment, and I think that she just has some itchiness because, the bites have to heal. So
yeah, it's true.
I watch out for her. I'll make sure that she's good.
Yeah. Our family has always been, at least me and you, have always just loved dogs, and I am so excited for the day we can get a dog. So part of my week this last week was dog sitting for like 8 days. We had a golden retriever from a family friend, and that was a lot of fun. We were honestly really sad whenever he came and took her home because it's just so much fun to have a dog. But we are gonna have to wait until we get a house before we can get a dog, and which that has been another part of my week is house hunting. We've looked at 4 houses already, and only one of them we were somewhat close to wanting. But we're just going to wait it out because the market's still just wild right now. So yeah, I guess you didn't even maybe know that. Just we're looking to buy a house again. Oh, I think I told you.
Yeah, you told me. Yeah, and that's really cool. I remember I offered to give you my agent's card. She got us a great deal with our house and helped us negotiate into the price that we were comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah.
We are using a family friend.
Yeah, that's what you told me. Somebody that you know, so.
Yeah. So it's going well, but the market is just so wild right now that it's not like an encouraging time to be looking for a house.
I think it's still a seller's market right now.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm sure that you've been told what that means.
Houses are getting offers like the day they go on the market. So we like have our eye out every day, just waiting for an email like, oh, another house is up. All right, we got to go see it. Like,
yeah,
it's crazy.
Yeah. Actually, this house that me and Ashley got, we found it the day that it was posted, literal hours after it was posted, and we had already gone to see a couple, like 4 houses earlier that day. Mm-hmm. And this house popped up. Oh, and fun fact, we got fleas that day because one of the houses had fleas in it.
Wow.
We're coming full circle on this years later. This is the climax of the plot.
Coming back to bite you.
Yeah. But yeah, that was gross and I hated it. The fleas, that was not fun. But we got rid of them immediately, but I did get bit a couple times.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this house was like hours after this house was posted, we took a look at it and we loved it and we were like, okay, let's put an offer on it. And it's a good thing too, because I think my next door neighbor Randy was actually planning on buying it. Because he owns most of the houses on the block and he rents them out mostly to people that he knows. But he's like, yeah, he kind of runs this place, except for me.
Oh yeah, except for you. You're the one. That's cool though. Yeah. So speaking of coffee, last night I had the idea. We were about to go sit on the porch and just hang out because Anna's sister is back. So we were just like hanging out, and I thought it would be a great idea have some decaf coffee. I was just craving some coffee, so I was like, yeah, I'll just make some. But I get my coffee from Hy-Vee in like bulk, and so it's not like labeled. I just like pour them into the bag. Then so I was very confident that this bag was my decaf coffee, and it was mostly empty, which I should have thought about, like, okay, it's mostly empty, so that means it's probably not, because I hardly ever drink my decaf coffee. So I made myself a cup of coffee, drank the whole thing, and as I was getting to the end, I was like, I wonder if that was decaf. Mind you, this was 8 p.m. at night, and yeah, sure enough, that was definitely not decaf coffee, and I was wide awake for a long time.
Is that why you texted me in like the wee hours, and you were like, "Hey, I'm gonna be up a little later tomorrow than you might expect"?
Yes, that is why, because it was 2 a.m. and I was just wide awake. Yeah. Luckily, I was able to fall asleep whenever I did try, probably around like 2:30. But that was fun. I thought the coffee tastes a little better than I thought it should as a decaf coffee, because they're usually kind of gross. At least the ones that I've got.
I actually really like the Aldi like standard decaf coffee, like their big tin.
Oh, I hate that one.
And because I drink coffee black, like I know exactly what it tastes like. And I drink gross. That one black. I disagree.
I tried it.
You know what? It's okay. Everybody has their own personal tastes and preferences.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what you learn as a bartender and food service supervisor. Just everybody, like, people's personal tastes are totally valid. It's just how everybody experiences their food and drinks.
It's true. It's true. Today, listeners, we are going to be talking about gender identity and sexuality and kind of exploring some of the possibilities in that and just discussing what we see in the world today and I guess kind of how to navigate those conversations, or well, really we'll see where this conversation goes. This podcast is very conversational. We do somewhat like structured things sometimes, but a lot of times it's just you're listening to a conversation evolving and us.
Literally the least amount of planning was put into this.
This
I
one
happen
is
to have studied a lot about gender. In an effort to understand people. I did mention earlier that I was a restaurant supervisor, and working in a restaurant in downtown Kansas City, I was a sexual and gender minority there. And by that I mean half the people I worked with were gay, or in one form or another part of the LGBTQIA community.
Yeah.
And so me, a straight cis man there, was like, oh, all these people here are really cool. I like these people.
Yeah.
I've never been somebody to like explicitly discriminate against people for things like that, but I did hold conservative views back in high school that were extremely unfortunate, to say the least.
Right. Yeah, which was part of our upbringing and just the culture that we are around, because we were a part of the conservative Christian culture that was very against that, and very much reinforced gender norms, gender roles. And when you add in that, maybe all of that doesn't exist, maybe all of that's kind of made up, then that kind of throws off their whole system. So of course they're going to be against it.
Everything's made up. We made everything up. No, I think even by the time I was like 17, I was like, I don't think that government should legislate marriage morality in that way, like in terms of just which sex or gender somebody wants to marry. And then I learned that C.S. Lewis shared that opinion, I believe.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay, cool. So this is like a normal opinion for like people to have.
Yeah.
Like this is an okay thing for me to think. And because I wanted to live in a world where that was the case, but I was kind of taught to believe that that was not okay.
Yeah.
But I have done a lot of work into undoing that. And so this isn't going to be a discussion. This is going to be a gender anarchy propaganda speed
Oh my
run.
gosh. Oh my gosh. I should have known bringing you onto this now.
No, I can bring it down to a conversation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can say what you need to say.
Yeah. I mean, everything will be filtered through the lens of the things that I believe, obviously.
Sure.
It may even be helpful for the audience to know what I believe, because I think, like, when I research things, I try to research from people who understand their own bias and, like, are explicit about it. Because if they say that, then they're aware of that. They're doing their best to be objective, but they know that nobody is completely objective. And so I can take their opinion and I can understand from which lens they wrote that opinion, and then I can find other information that maybe comes from different sources, and I kind of compile that. But I am I'm extremely left-wing politically. My younger high school self would probably have an existential crisis if he found out that he grew up to become like a socialist who is also like a gender anarchist and stuff like that. Probably. So I align that way politically, and so Pearl, no, you are not a cat. You do not climb onto this table. Thank you. Anyway, so yeah, that's kind of where I come from. So I'm always going to approach it from a stance that right now, people's gender identity can be extremely important to them. I'd like to see a future where gender is extremely personal and individualized, and everybody is kind of born into a society that doesn't assume their gender, and they get to express that however they want, and it can continue to be important to them, but not with defined social roles, just with people being able to express themselves however they want. And we can talk about the different cultures that have done things like that and like the different viewpoints on that, because there's a lot of different ways that has come about. Not like that specifically, but like things that are more like broadly defining than the American culture. I probably use the wrong words for that, but it's fine.
Yeah, no, you're good. Yeah, and listeners, as you kind of see in this episode, my older brother is quite a bit more educated and researched than I am. You know, a lot of times I kind of just come into these conversations. Like, I've definitely learned a lot and like listened to a lot of voices, but he definitely does a lot more than me and has been around it a bit longer than I have too. But I do have a question.
I think, no, go for your question.
Yeah, so you kind of mentioned it, but I wanted to like kind of emphasize, you know, gender is such a big part of our identity and like kind of what makes us who we are. And, you know, the whole like gender aspect is kind of even just the way that we express ourselves. And that's something that is very personal. So we've got these like two sides of people who want to, you know, one side wants to be very accepting and allow people to, you know, explore their identities and be comfortable in who they are. And this other side who very much wants to invalidate and kind of dictate what that needs to look like. And so I'm curious in what you think. Why do you think kind of the side that wants to kind of dictate and say like, no, you have to fit into these boxes. Like, it's not okay for you to express yourself this way. It's not okay for you to do this. When it's, you know, that's not them personally. That's them like kind of dictating another person's life. Why do you think that's such a big topic? Because it is something that is like just so personal. Like, why do you think people care so much about something that's not even affecting them necessarily?
Well, you were the one that showed me the book Jesus and John Wayne.
Yeah.
So
yeah, true. I did. I haven't finished it yet.
You haven't finished it? I listened to that book in like 3 days.
I needed to give my mind a break for a bit because
it's so dense.
I was diving
it's incredibly dense.
Yeah. I realized after leaving the church that I had never in my life given my mind a rest. In like a time where I was just like, you know what, I'm not going to research things for once. Like, I'm just going to do that thing we always talk about in church but never do, rest. And so that's kind of what I'm doing right now. And part of that is giving my mind a break. And so I will definitely finish it at some point, but no, I haven't finished it. So, but anyway, that was a tangent. Continue with what you were saying.
Yeah. Okay. So the question of why is it so important to people to whom it doesn't apply? Like you were not a trans person, so why do you care if somebody else is?
Or even dating a trans person, probably, or interested in a trans person.
Yeah,
so why
not
do you
interested
care?
in.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of, so it's almost explicitly fear is in that tends to be when I think of the only reason that bigotry is allowed to persist is because of fear. And people will say things like, oh, I'm not scared of trans people because they're not physically scared. Like, there's a lot of people who think that only applies in like a physical, like violent sense, which goes back to that kind of patriarchal masculinity sort of stereotype, or social gender normative social role is what that is. But what they really fear more often than not is there's a few things. There's a lot of fear mongering about like turning kids trans.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Which technically in a gender abolitionist society, trans people wouldn't exist because there's nothing to transition from. You just you just define your gender. Yeah. But like they would probably see that as teaching kids to be trans because you would just teach them to express themselves in whatever way they want. So there's some disagreement there. It's always incredibly reductive. It's much more complex than it ever comes out of like somebody's mouth when they talk about that.
Yeah, and I wanted to interject and say like not just necessarily like have kids express themselves however they want, but because that sounds very much like it's a choice, but however they are, like however what makes them who they are.
Well, I think that's extremely valid, and thank you for clarifying. I think when I say that, I mean that a kid wants to be who they are. When you grow up, definitely. You start internalizing external factors, and you start thinking about what society expects from you and what you want, and people are trying to figure out who they are. When you're a kid, definitely you just are trying to become the person that you are. So what you want is the person. And so obviously this operates within like a framework too. Like there's a reasonable extent to which children's behavior should be moderated, but something like a child born male wanting to wear a dress or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that like will come across incredibly offensive to somebody who is on the opposite end of the political spectrum to me. But if you go back to before World War II, that was extremely common for young boys to wear dresses.
Really? Huh.
Yeah, and like and we can talk about like ancient history too, like how back in medieval times the hourglass figure was considered masculine, and medieval armor brought out a bust and came down to a skinny waist and then wide hips.
Wow.
And so that is a physiologically more feminine, but back then it was considered extremely masculine. And you were considered less masculine if your armor didn't kind of create that, or if your shape didn't kind of create that look.
Wow.
It was weird. Yeah, and it's just because all of this is socially constructed. So that's something to keep in mind. A lot of people also, when they fear about this, they think that trans people are trying to erase sex. And that's because of the conflation between gender and sex. Gender is a social category that you fit into. It is entirely socially constructed. Like when we talk about masculinity and femininity, we're talking about social prescriptions that really have been formed in pretty recent memory. Like as we can discover when we talk about this, like the modern gender normative standards are not like one biologically inherent into something that's been around for thousands of years. It's been around for maybe like 100 years.
Right. Yeah. And it's always changing. It's always changing too. Like even like the idea, like I'm trying to think of things that have even changed like in my lifetime of like 23 years. Part of growing up was the idea that like, men don't cry. And like, that's like a thing placed on like masculinity and being a male. And being like the gender of a male, I guess. They're like, as this gender, you're not supposed to have this expression of yourself. But then now, I think people are becoming more accepting of that. There's still kind of some of that, but people are like, no, like real men do have emotions, but maybe just don't express them. I don't know. It's still like a weird place.
I had an argument with somebody about that, and he was like, oh, so you think that men should just all be like sissy whining in a corner about all their problems? And I was like, no, there's not. It's not a dichotomy. It's not either you cry all the time or you don't cry at all. It's just sometimes you're sad and that's okay.
Yeah, like
emotions. It is not healthy to force men into repressing their emotions. You're trying to hold a gender standard that makes no sense, like psychologically.
Yeah. Because whenever you disconnect from your emotions, I mean, that's what can create people who are then also disconnected from like their anger, like because they've repressed their like sadness, like they don't even know how to get in touch with their own emotions, and so like they don't know how to deal with them, and so that can lead to having like angry responses or even like being abusive or like things like that, because like you don't know how to feel and like have empathy for people, and when you don't have empathy for people, then like you don't necessarily care what you do to them or how they feel.
Yeah. Did I answer your question? I feel like we got onto a couple tangents.
Yeah.
I don't know if it feels like I answered your question.
I think
it's really just, I think the simple answer is just fear, and it can be fear about a lot of things that causes people to worry about this. I think that I have a lot of hope that that'll go away. I started talking to this conservative guy recently who just wanted to talk to me about politics, and we're extremely like amicable with each other. I don't think it does any good for me to like verbally assault people who disagree with me on things, because it's really the system, the societal system, and like the things from the top down. Like an individual, more often than not, like unless I think that they're like going to put somebody else in harm's way, verbally or physically, then I'm not going to probably verbally attack them.
Right.
If I think that somebody will cause harm, I'll give them more pushback than somebody who just wants to have a conversation with me. So I do know how to do the conversation and not just the propaganda thing.
Yeah, I know you do.
But I asked him, because he told me about some of his more socially progressive views, and he didn't even bring up like gay marriage, which happened, like that was nationally legalized in 2015. I don't know if we all remember that. That was 6 years ago. They've been fighting for that for like 100 years.
Yeah.
That was a year after I graduated high school. And to me now, it's insane that was even a debate.
Right.
And so I asked him, I was like, so what's your views on gay marriage? And he was like, that doesn't even come into my mind. Like, why would I care who people marry? But like the messaging back then was actually very similar to the messaging about like trans people in the modern day, which is the gays are going to turn your kids gay. Like they're coming for your kids and they want to make all your kids gays and lesbians. And like that was one of the fear talking points. And now they're using the same exact one for trans people. One of the reasons that I talk about trans rights a lot is because of that. There's not really an America where trans identity is validated, but gay marriage is illegal again. So if we hold the line on trans rights, then we're going to curtail any systemic oppression towards like people who are elsewhere in the LGBT community.
Yeah, I feel like darn it, I had a thought. So that idea of like they're coming after your kids, like in my mind right now, my thought is like you obviously have never talked to a gay person in your life, because like when you actually like talk to somebody who is in the LGBTQIA community, who like they're not coming for anyone. Like they're not like trying to like hurt anyone. If anything, like they are the ones who are constantly being hurt and oppressed and discriminated against, and like they're just regular people. Like they're not these like malicious like secret society who's like I don't know, trying to like ruin the future of America or something. There are people who are doing that, but it's not them.
I mean, they can fearmonger over it because there is an LGBT agenda, but it's not a bad agenda. Everybody has an agenda, right? Yeah. Their agenda was and is that they want equal rights with everybody. Trans people want bodily autonomy and individual autonomy, the ability to express themselves in the truest form to themselves. Mm-hmm. So they could use that agenda and be like, look, they have an agenda. And but like, yeah, of course they have an agenda. They've been fighting for 100 years, longer than that, but like really had some social traction for that amount of time.
Yeah.
In order to get their equal rights. And that's what they really want. And they're not, that's as far as it goes. Like once they get there, it's like, great. Okay. Now we just exist in society with you all. Like that is what we want. That's the gay agenda.
Yeah.
It's not this whole, it's hard for me to even talk about it, because it's hard for me to believe that people believe that about people, you know? Like even when I did hold harmful opinions about the LGBT community, I don't think I ever legitimately took that seriously. I just thought it was icky. I think like that was it was and half the time it is just I think that they're icky kind of reaction, like if you
because
really
you don't
get
relate
down to it. Because I've like debated libertarians before who are like a libertarian is like no government intervention, but also I'm anti-trans. Like, what do you mean? Don't you believe in bodily autonomy? I thought that's one of your central tenets. Like, why would you try to restrict somebody's bodily autonomy? It's because they think it's icky. Like, that's the entire thing.
And part of that is like,
gets really frustrating.
It is, and part of that is because you've been conditioned to think that way. Because like if you weren't conditioned at a young age to think that is like icky and gross or weird, it wouldn't be. Like you probably wouldn't really think anything of it, like because you could just easily explain to a child, like, you know, some people like people who look different than them, some people like people who look the same as them, like, you know, why does it have to be weird? But whenever you make it weird and like you condition kids to like think that that's gross, think that is like not okay, then like obviously they're gonna still have lasting reactions whenever they're older, because like you have conditioned them to think that. And that's an agenda. That's an agenda at its effect right there, is like conditioning people to think about this group of people that you really don't really know anything about or care about at all, and like condition people to think about them really negatively. That's an agenda that is really toxic. I mean, just even calling back to our conversation last week about sin and like our whole like tool belt of morality and like things that are like harmful and stuff. Like that is like has very real world effects that are harmful to like a large group of people, like conditioning people to think of other people negatively. Like it's pretty easy to see like how that has like really hurt people. I mean, even just take the documentary that just came out called Pray Away, and it's talking about conversion therapy and kind of the really damaging effects that has had on people who are in the LGBTQ plus community. And like you can measure the effects of that and how negative that is and how like it has driven people to suicide. But then whenever you measure the effects of people who are like accepting their identities and like being comfortable in who they are and being accepted, I mean, there's not much like what harm is there that you're measuring besides like this goes against my book that I think is 100% true. You know, like what is the harm that like they're pointing to that like now I need to get involved to stop you from doing anything?
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of fear about like society coming apart at the loss of masculinity.
Yeah. And patriarchy.
I think this might be an interesting point to talk about some of the other societies and like gender expressions in other cultures.
You know more than me, so shoot for it.
I know some. I think it's just interesting to examine because we have an extremely westernized perspective. We think about everything in terms of the West. And the West is not as homogenous as people think it is. But if we look to countries like outside of the West, like Indonesia, they don't have gendered pronouns. I would also like to not have gendered pronouns. Wow. I think that gendered pronouns are cringe. They refer to older and younger siblings not as their gender, but as older and younger.
Oh, interesting.
They refer to people in professional statuses or just as another human. They have one pronoun and one gender pronoun that they use. And so it's not a gender, it's just, it describes that you're referring to a person, and that person can be whatever. It is also, I believe, a pretty Muslim-dominated country, so there probably is a significant amount of patriarchy that exists there. Yeah. But the gender isn't even part of that in the language. Because when we get down to it, Muslim fundamentalists and Christian fundamentalists agree on a lot in terms of like society. Christians like to act like that's not the case, but they agree on a lot of things.
They do. I mean, I feel like we see that with like I saw some news articles about, you know, like the Taliban taking over Afghanistan very recently, and there were some very extreme right-wing people who were like, you know, maybe this isn't a bad thing. You know, they hold some of the same beliefs that we do. And it's like, you people are like, oh my gosh, I don't know. It just blew my mind. But also, it's like, hey, at least you said it. Policy. At least you were honest.
At least they had the self-awareness, right? Regardless of that, the gender in the language doesn't need to be there. I also learned, I saw this on TikTok, so I had to look into it a little bit to see if this was, you know, somebody gaslighting me or like if this is actually the case. But the Talmud recognizes 6 genders.
Oh.
And the Talmud is a book of laws built around Torah to keep people from ever breaking Torah. And Torah is what we would colloquially refer to as the Old Testament.
Well, the first 5 books.
Well, yeah, the first 5 books. My bad. The books, the laws of Moses, to keep anybody from ever breaking the Mosaic laws. Yeah. They had the Talmud. And in the Talmud, they recognize 6 different genders, which means that it is not even a biblical understanding that there are only 2 genders.
Yeah, I mean, eunuchs were a third gender.
Eunuchs were a third gender, yeah.
Kind of, yeah.
There was also, they also just recognized trans men and trans women. and they recognized androgynous people, and they recognized intersex people. They did all of that. And intersex is another thing that comes into sex being on it being bimodal scientifically, not binary. There are primarily two sexes, but there are also men with XXY chromosomes. There are women with XY chromosomes. There are people who have physical characteristics of both sexes. So it operates there are primarily just male and female, but there's also intersex people who are common enough to create a scientific understanding around sex in regards to them. It's considered part of the norm. But yeah, so I really thought that thing about the Talmud was interesting, because I think that that's a big thing about like on the podcast that you showed me,
which, by the way, that podcast is the Bema podcast, BEMA podcast by Marty Solomon.
They kind of mentioned Christians kind of section themselves off into the Western world and stopped taking the opinions of Jewish thought.
Yeah, which is
how to interpret the Bible. For 1,800 years, we just didn't talk to them.
Yeah, they just straight up turned their backs on them. And
and there's still a lot of anti-Semitism in the church because of that, which is really unfortunate.
A lot that they don't even realize. That I didn't even realize.
The reason that we don't have, we're still working on, from what I understand, the Talmud is still being translated into English because, for the first time, because we never cared to translate.
I don't know about, the Talmud probably is too, but the Midrash is, I think, for the first time ever being translated into English.
Yeah. It's just, it's weird. We should care about that stuff, But... I like the lore in the Midrash. I think that stuff is really cool. The kind of extra stories and stuff. But anyway, we're getting off of the thing. We're going on that tangent thing that we like to do.
Yeah. Well, hey.
But anyway, I think one of the important things to realize is that there's nothing biological about being a male that makes you wear a suit. We could just as easily have a society where men wore dresses and women wore suits, and that was the gender norm. And hey, maybe I would prefer that. I don't know. A dress seems pretty comfortable. But even hundreds of years ago, men did wear dresses. Yeah. That was not considered weird, and it wasn't considered cross-dressing. That was just one of the clothes that you could choose from.
Right.
In ancient Greek city-states, I think that the gender norm of men being sexually aggressive was flipped to where women were considered to be sexually aggressive.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and so there's just so many societies throughout history, and I mentioned the medieval thing, where the modern conceptualization of gender roles did not exist. And back in medieval times again, which we're going to think of as being primarily Christian, in the European sense, there is also medieval, Japan and medieval, that was a time period, so it was all over the world. Yeah. But in the European sense, for the most part, men worked and went to war, and women did the child rearing. But a community of women, they didn't do it alone in their little house where they just ran around like crazy. They had all their friends. So really, kids were raised by communities of women.
Okay, yeah.
And so the idea that sure, men were around, definitely, but the idea that the man has to come home from his job at 5:00 every day and walk through his white picket fence to say hi to his little family sitting on the porch waiting for him, that's a 1940s and 1950s idea that was invented in order to reinforce masculinity in America. That's not a historical gender role.
Yeah, I think studying history is very empowering because you start to see where a lot of these ideas and such started to pop up and become hot topics where before they weren't. And if we knew history, we'd realize that, maybe it's a little silly that we're talking about this right now, or at least talking about it in the way that we are. I mean, even the the idea of like homosexuality in the Bible, that word didn't show up into the Bible until 1946. That was the first time that the word homosexual was in the Bible. And you can do research on this. You can look it up. It's the RSV translation. There's a movie being made about it right now. It's called 1946. It's not out yet, but I'm excited to see it. But
okay.
Whenever you start to like see history and see like now these people are starting to push for this, whereas before like they didn't care. And like in the 1800s, I would need to fact check this. So maybe I just shouldn't say it if I need to fact check it. But anyway,
I don't know. You can say it. I might know.
I mean, I heard of like nobles and such just like going to bars and like having gay sex, like just normally. Like they would have their spouse and stuff, and like marriages weren't homosexual, but like yeah, they would go have sex with men.
That's probably the case. I mean, in ancient Roman society, it was considered masculine to have sex with men.
That's true. That's also
like
true.
you were like that was part of their masculine identity, was that they had sex with their bros.
Yeah.
Like that
now,
was.
Yeah.
So, and nowadays that would be considered like not masculine because it's gay, as if gay people can't be masculine in like a traditional sense. I've met plenty of masculine gay guys.
Yeah.
Because I've met a ton of gay people working where I've worked and being in the circles that I've been in.
Yeah, but just kind of going back to what I was saying of like learning through history, that has been very eye-opening for me, just to realize like some of the ideas that are pushed so hard as if they're ancient ideas, like especially in like the Christian circles, like no, this is like always how it was, like the Christians were always against this or for this or talked about this. I don't know that they were. Like I don't think.
Yeah, exactly.
Like were they always against homosexuality? Yeah, they were, like historically, but they didn't talk about it as much as we did now. And like I mean, you see like the first stories in Acts of like people, the Ethiopian eunuch, which was then like kind of classified as another gender, being accepted into the church. And then the how do you spell it? The Didache. It's called the Didache. But that's like, it's like the instructions given by the disciples. That is like one of our more ancient texts, but like it's not obviously in the Bible. One of their things was like, I think it was in there. I could be wrong. It might be some other document, but they're like, hey, stop making yourselves eunuchs. Like too many people were like making themselves eunuchs, and they realized like, oh wait, Jesus isn't coming back yet. And so we're all going to like die because we can't make offspring. So stop. Like, it's okay. If you want to become a eunuch, that's fine. But like, not everybody should do that.
Yeah.
And so it's just
you want
interesting.
To know something
like,
really interesting? In the Catholic Church, there are saints who are trans men.
Really?
There are, or I don't know, I think a few saints, but at the very least, like significant church leaders, women who chose to live as men, who cut their hair short, dressed as men, and went to monasteries or whatever, did their best to hide their feminine characteristics, lived as men and identified as men. So I guess me calling them women at the beginning was a little that was just for understanding of like I should say AFAB, I think is the PC term right now. But they and it also depends on their motivation, like whether they wanted to be men or if they just wanted a high position in the church, and the way for them to do that was to live as a man, like if it was a Mulan or like a actual like trans man scenario.
Yeah.
But yeah, basically like trans men were in like the higher parts of the church. It was actually considered holy for a woman to approach that because of patriarchy.
Well, yeah.
Men are considered more holy than women. So a AMAB, assigned male at birth person, who wanted to transition into becoming a woman was seen as being less holy than even a woman because it was a man who chose to be a woman in their eyes.
Right.
But a woman who wanted to choose to be a man to them was seen as being awesome and super based. They liked that. So it's not, I'm not saying that the Catholic Church was trans affirming or good. I'm just saying that
No.
it's interesting that their idea of gender is completely different to ours. Because in our modern society, we wouldn't fly for that.
Not
and
at
we
all,
would say
no.
that stands against like church tradition, but it doesn't.
Right, because
It's
nowadays
just another, it's just another component of that, like, that history that's interesting to learn about.
it is, yeah, because nowadays, like, the ideal woman is someone who's quiet and submissive and, like, keeps the house clean, I guess, and cooks. Yeah, like, I think it's a big part of this comes down to, like, power and, like, power structures. And, like, I'm going to use the Bible for a second just to kind of, like, point to what I think would be, like, a better society and a more, like, healthy relationship with gender and sexuality is like when Paul is writing in Galatians, I believe, he says, like, in Christ there is no slave nor free. And then at the end, it's kind of a weird thing he adds, but he says there's no male or female. And with that statement, like,
Based.
yeah, like he's saying, like, there's no distinction between us. Like, there shouldn't be a distinction between us, but like, we still, obviously in his day they had societal structures that would not make that possible, like, for you to really be equal. And still today we still perpetuate some of those patriarchal structures where, like, the man has the power and, like, kind of is refusing to give that back to women to make it equal. And I think that's really all they want. Like, people like to dog on feminists, like they're trying to, like, just flip the power structure, which maybe some of them are, but I think a majority of, yeah, honestly, I don't think that'd be a bad thing, but, like, a lot of them are just really trying to get equality, like true equality. But, like, people are fighting so hard against that because when you've been in power for so long, equality feels like oppression. I think that's a phrase that people like to use, like, equality feels like oppression to those who are privileged or something like that. Like, those who have the power, like, whenever you start to, like, quote unquote lose some of your power, which I guess you are, but it's an imbalance of power, then, like, it's gonna feel like inequality just because obviously you're fine with the power you have, but the other people, no, it's not, like, it's not okay.
I think you and Christian talked about this in your First Sin podcast, where there are some really weird laws in the Old Testament in regards to things like slavery and gender roles. But you brought up that there's kind of an argument that God takes a people and tries to whittle away the bad things and reinforce the good things. And so at that point, he was just like, I'm only going to push you as far as I think that you can go in regards to this. So let's, like, focus on some of these things and we can just kind of restrict some of these other bad things for now. And I think that, like, Christians will say that, but then they assume that we got it right finally in, like, the 1950s or whatever. Like as if we don't still have things to work on in our society. I mean, the fact that, like, thousands of people every day die of hunger in America, to me, is, like, anti-biblical. That in itself. But, yeah, just kind of that discussion of, like, oh, hey, we got it right. You know, it just kind of shows our superiority complex to the modern day. Like, my ideal world, I don't think I will ever see in my lifetime. No. That doesn't mean I'm not going to advocate for it. Of course I will, because I would like for future generations to experience the thing that I think would be best for everybody. Yeah. But, yeah, so it kind of is that superiority complex that we have in the modern day where, like, it seems like there was a lot of acceptance. Like, Paul seemed to, like, that was kind of a base gender anarchy take. We're all equal. We don't need to differentiate between...
But I mean, he says some other things that are, very questionable later on. But I mean, that one,
he has some hot
takes.
He has some weird takes. But, like, that in particular, like, and then if you look at, like, the genders in the Talmud, like, we have some acceptance that we were still working towards, and we are still working towards it. Thousands of years later, it's been a long time that people have been fighting for their rights.
Literally just to be treated like human beings.
Yeah, I think we're getting there. I think I will see probably a lot of trans acceptance in my lifetime. And that's, like, to me, that's really awesome that people in my lifetime will start to be allowed to express themselves how they want. I don't think we're going to get to gender anarchy, because to a lot of trans people, their gender is very important to them because it's something that's created. It creates unique experiences. But I was going to ask you some questions, because I think that this idea can come across like scary to some people, even people who want to accept it. Like, there are people who are like, I want this, but I don't know. Like, I haven't mentally done this transition into thinking about things like this, like into thinking about gender as being a social role and not a biological role. Things like that. So like there's kind of some mental, like there's some ways to think about it. Like if we just talk about like people who are transgender, can you define a woman in a way that includes all cis women and excludes trans women? And listeners, Micah is being an extremely accepting person. I'm asking him to do something that's really difficult, and he's going to try to be bigoted. But he is not actually bigoted. he loves everybody.
I do, yeah. Yeah.
This is just a mental exercise for how we think about things in society. So can you offer that kind of a definition?
Honestly, the only thing that I can really, and I think this is what people will always come back to, because like if you just talk about like feminine things, then like obviously that doesn't exclude people who express themselves in a feminine way. So people who would be trans women. So the only thing you can point to is like what your sex that you're assigned at birth. And I think that's why that's why people conflate the two of sex and gender, because like that's the biological thing you can point to of, well, no, you were born female with female parts of your body, therefore you are female.
So women who are born without female parts, like if they're born without a uterus or whatever, they're less of a woman.
Well, I'm not saying they are, but
I know you're not saying that they are. I'm just like, it's an exercise, and like normally the answers you get to that is like the ability to have children,
right?
Which you're gonna go. There are cis women, like, so all women who have passed menopause are no longer women, and women who are infertile are not women. Fun fact: Abraham did not marry a woman because Sarai was infertile.
Oh yeah. But then she became fertile. She could have children later. Yeah, and I think it's like it's such a ridiculous.
We can discuss that later, but yeah.
Like it becomes a very like reductive way of looking at women too, because like then you only value them as a woman if they are able to make children, or if they're able to like, you know, really, I guess that's it, like be a mother. When like, is that really all it is? Like, is that really all that women are? And I think that's, shout out to my friend Rachel on the Recovering Evangelical and the series she's doing, because she's like talked about it a few times, and just the way that like women are reduced to their reproductive organs, and just like you are like a baby maker, and like you never have even like as a woman you never have autonomy over your own body. Like you are either your father's or your husband's, or now you're your child's, whatever. You're never just a woman. You're never just yourself.
Right. And you can kind of tie that into like your definition. Somebody who's AFAB is like what Christian would define as a woman, and like that's really the only thing that you can say. But like, if you were to ask somebody, like let's just pull one of the trans men out of the Catholic Church and put them into the modern day. Somebody, and then let's just say that they take testosterone as well. That person is living as a woman, right? Because of what's between their legs. They would say no. And it's because they know internally that it is a gender role that's socially constructed. Yeah. Not something that's physical. And they would be very bothered by that person. And they are bothered by trans men. Trans women get focused on a lot because they tend to be seen as more vulnerable.
Yeah.
because trans men are, juicing on some testosterone. And also, to be clear, you do not have to be on HRT in order to be trans. Literally the only thing you have to do is identify as a different gender.
Right, yeah, for sure.
I'm validating of all of those things. But like, just for like a normal, like, for the way that it's commonly understood, like you're gonna think of somebody who's attempting to transition their appearance. That's kind of a common way to think about it, unless they're non-binary, in which case they may just decide that gender doesn't really apply to them, and then they can identify as like their, it's all really complicated. And I don't think that the complexity is a bad thing. I just think that it's something that I still grasp with mentally, even though I've kind of come around all the way to being accepting of all the genders.
Yeah.
And gender expressions. It's because I didn't learn anything about this growing up, and so now I'm like speed running a gender studies course online with any free resource that I can get.
Yeah, definitely.
Because I want to be affirming of everybody in their respective like expressions.
Yeah.
But yeah, so those are kind of mental exercises. Like, just think about like at what point do I say that this person has like lost their masculinity or their femininity or whatever, and then does it even matter at that point? Mm-hmm. Like, why does it matter so much? Because in our modern society, we have women who are the breadwinners, men who stay at home with the kids. We have I mean, obviously, like a lot of trans people, non-binary people, we have men who are, extremely emotionally expressive, women who are more emotionally closed off. Mm-hmm. We have men
me and Anna.
who are, yeah.
We are literally those two things.
We have men who are asexual and women who are very sexual, and just like the things, the ways that we used to understand gender don't help us understand people anymore.
I don't even think it's necessarily like how we understood gender, but how some people like pushed that gender should be, because like I feel like
it was forced from the top down.
Yeah, like people have had an understanding of gender, and like other cultures have had much better understandings of gender even. But we've had people who are powerful who are pushing their agenda, whether that's political or, I mean, a lot of times it is, because that's where like a lot of the power
normally
is.
Political, yeah.
Normally political. Especially whenever we're talking about like American, like recent, and like how Christianity has woven itself into that. It's all very political. But like, it's all kind of like a power grab, and like, it's not necessarily about even what they think is right, or like an understanding of gender, because their understanding of gender is like pretty decent, but like just the way that like agendas are pushed and like norms are pushed, like that has stunted a lot of people's, like us who grew up in that circle, like our understanding of it, whereas like the understanding of like humanity in general is probably like a lot better.
I think that another thing that might scare some people is that they're worried of being the second class gender. Like if we want to go to a Christian normative understanding of gender, and let's just talk about it in that framework for a second, because to pick apart somebody's framework, you have to address things within their own framework. So I'm just going to talk about men and women, not to be exclusionary. But like they see, like if you have women taking the dominant social role and men taking what they see as the submissive social role, they start to fear that, because they think that they're losing something. And that's because for all the talk about equal rights and women having equal rights, they understand that we still have an expectation in a patriarchal society that men are on top and women are on bottom. And so that's their understanding, so that scares them. And so it really, you have to think about it, like, is that where the fear comes from? Because if that's where the fear comes from, let's just get equal rights for everybody. Let's make sure that, like, let's all be feminists. Let's lift up everybody to the same level and put everybody on the same level socially. And then we don't have to worry about, like, which gender. Like, that's really weird to worry about that kind of thing to me.
Yeah, it is.
Like, I could go deep into that kind of conversation as well, because like people on the right will talk about how we live in like a meritocracy, but like when I say that, I'm saying that we should be a meritocracy, but and actually I think meritocracies are cringe, but like if you want to get to that point, then you could like what I'm saying is that we don't live in a meritocracy, because we do have social classes that are oppressed and not given an equal opportunity to get what they need.
I don't even know what a meritocracy is.
It's like I'm probably going to define it really poorly. It's basically like saying that you earn, like you have what you deserve based on the work that you put into it. It's that whole like, oh, well, if you want food, maybe you should go to work or whatever, like that. And then that viewpoint, the reason that I don't like meritocracy is because when a social class gets oppressed, it rarely tells people that there's something wrong with the system. It more often tells people that there's something wrong with the class of people that's getting oppressed.
Yeah.
And that's extremely problematic.
And it's also super ableist for people who don't have, I guess, as much. I don't even want to say as much ability as other people, but in a capitalistic society, they would view you as less productive or less able-bodied, when really that is because our society is not built to help people or value people who are not quote unquote as productive. I just hate saying that, but I have to use these terms to talk about
Come on, comrade. Let's remove the means of living from the commodification system.
Oh my gosh.
Food should be free, and so should housing.
I agree, but that's a topic for another time. I think we should bring it back, and I think it's important to talk about then, because I think we are going to have a lot of listeners who are kind of in the deconstruction space, and some of them might be early on in that process, and so it's kind of a hard thing sometimes to tackle this whenever it's been really pushed into you so hard. So what are some of the things that you recommend, or we should probably just recommend to help us to engage with this in a more healthy way, and not do so out of a place of just this fear that's been instilled into us, but actually learn for ourselves what is good and bad, and how do we do that. I guess, what are some ways we can explore that?
Yeah, so I think you showed me that book by Austin Hartkey, Transforming. That's a really good place to kind of explore that journey, because Austin is a trans man, and so his perspective on it is, I don't want to call I come across as a cis man. I'm kind of non-conforming, I guess, but I pass as a cis man, so I don't have that same experience that Austin Hartkey did. Austin had to deal with actually actual oppression, and does. So I think Transforming is a really good book, because he talks about the way to talk to trans people. Don't ask about their dead name, which is the name that they had if they chose a name after transitioning. Not everybody does. Some people have agender names, so they just keep their name. But just don't ask about the dead name. Don't ask things about where they are in their transitionary stage unless they offer that information. Or if you have a significant amount of trust with somebody. Obviously everything gets really individual when you start becoming friends with somebody, but when approaching somebody that you don't know, I would also just encourage people to use gender neutral pronouns and descriptions until they know somebody. That especially applies.
You said they. Until they know somebody. It's really easy. We do it all the time. It's so easy. So just do it.
Right. The they, them thing is not a singular or plural thing. What Micah just said, that was really easy for me to say, because that is how it is used in English. I was not referring to a particular gender in that sentence. So I said they, because that is how English works. So it is completely normal from an English perspective to use they them pronouns for somebody whose gender you're not assuming, or for somebody who chooses to be, or not chooses, but somebody who identifies as non-binary. Sorry, when I say chooses, a lot of times I mean identifies as, because I'm still readjusting my language personally, but identifies as is a identity thing and like who they actually are, not who they choose to be. So somebody who like is non-binary will often use either neopronouns, and so it's normally never offensive to ask somebody for their pronouns. Like that might be different from person to person, but I've never had somebody be upset if I asked their pronouns. You just start off not assuming their pronouns, and if you feel like the conversation is at a point where like you might want to use a pronoun, you just be like, hey, what pronouns would you prefer me to use for you, or whatever, and then that normally helps people understand that you're being accepting of them. Because you're asking for how they want to be treated, which is great. So I would also just say, like, it can be really weird sometimes, like, if you grew up in a really, like, hyper-conservative evangelical sense. Like, I'm still reprogramming my language, which is why if I misspoke at any point during this, that's just part of that. I have, like, used problematic language in the past, and that was kind of how I was trained to use language. And so sometimes that'll slip, but really I internally affirm everybody's gender identity.
Right, for sure.
But what point was I making? Reprogramming your language is really hard, so be forgiving of yourself.
It is, but
what really
work
matters
on it too,
is how you work on it.
It is like our language right now is kind of designed to exclude and invalidate certain people.
It is, yeah.
Like it's literally designed for that. It just is. It just is the way it is, I guess.
You can say that. I mean, you obviously, like, the English language wasn't penned 100 years ago with the intention of excluding people.
No.
But the way that it's developed socially is a development of excluding certain people.
Yeah.
Because they were not recognized in society. So that is what we're doing right now with language, is attempting to, because the English language has always changed. If you read an ancient English work like Beowulf in the original English, you will not be able to understand it, I promise you.
Yeah.
It is impossible to understand English from like the 1100s because English has always changed. And so what we're trying to do is change English.
Because even language, even language is a social construct. Like, we have constructed language, and that's why language changes, is because like meanings of words change, and like certain words we stop using, and like there's nothing wrong with that. It's just like language is a tool for us to understand each other and hear each other. And so like as long as you understand what somebody's saying, like there's nothing. I'm getting into another topic now of like how language is classist and stuff, because like I
think it's like, relevant
because we talk about how, like, just as an example, the idea of there being like proper grammar and language is, I don't even want to say somewhat of like a classist and like racist idea, but like it's actually pretty that way, because it's designed to be different, and like it basically is saying like anyone who's like indigenous or, like the black community or something, like we in like school are taught that that's the incorrect way to speak, right? Even though like we know what we're saying, we understand exactly what they mean. It's not a problem there.
Right, a conversation is not an academic paper. Like, if you understand somebody, then we're using language correctly.
and then,
and
but
if
then
you don't
that's
understand somebody, then maybe the problem isn't the other. And I don't want to say the problem is anybody, because I don't like to tell people that they're the problem.
It's a
but
system
like,
we're a part of.
maybe you just need to, it's a system we're a part of. We always criticize the system. But maybe you just need to expose yourself more to people. There's probably tons of great, like, not probably, there are tons of great trans creators and non-binary creators on TikTok who will talk about gender expression, who will normalize that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I think normalizing it personally is really important. Like reaffirming in your head, like when you're like just kind of reaffirming people's gender identity, exploring those sorts of things. As far as like you can kind of check out influences, I guess, like social influencers. Samantha Lux is a YouTuber, trans woman who talks a lot about trans issues. Her takes are always really good. She is very amicable towards people who don't understand. And she understands that like she's there to spread normativity, like normalization and awareness. So I always like her for gender things.
I think
just kind of that normalization process, because once it feels normal, it gets really easy. And I will still sometimes, like, I have slipped up with non-binary people I've known and like used a gendered pronoun. They don't get mad at me because they know that my like that's not normally how that's not how I think about them, or how I that's not me like assigning them a gender. That's just because I am still reprogramming my language and like I slipped up. People are really like, you'll find that like people are really accepting. There's a lot of demonization of like trans people and stuff, and it's really weird. They're extremely accepting people and
incredibly patient, especially like because they're the ones who
extremely patient.
Like they're constantly being discriminated against, yet they like have so much patience for those of us who are like still learning and like mess up. Like they don't owe us that patience. Like they have been oppressed by people like us, and so like, but they still do, and like that is what I have seen as well.
We just want to be better allies, and so working on that is really important. So I would say just like educate. If you educate yourself on those sorts of things, talk to people who are willing to talk about it. You don't want to force somebody who is not gender conforming into a conversation about that sort of thing. That can be weird and offensive, but like somebody who you know, or if you meet somebody, or if you enter that community one way or another and you start talking to somebody, if you become friends with that person, honestly, that in itself is a great way to normalize it. Like I had a lot of that stuff normalized just because I was around it so much, and like all of this fear mongering that I got put into my head just turned out not to be true. I was like, all of these like preconceived notions that I had about this, like I treated this person as a human who in like the respect that they wanted to be treated with, because that's just how I treat people. I was raised to be respectful of people. That's another thing I was raised to do, and that was a good thing, to be respectful of other people. And so through that process, I was like, oh, you're like a really cool person, and all these things that I don't know why I ever thought these things at this point, because so that normalization process that normalization process is really important.
I think some of the best things you can do are just like listen to their voices, whether you find them on YouTube, TikTok, if that's just whatever the best way that is. I mean, the best thing you can do is like get to know one in person, like get to know one, like somebody in person. Gosh,
it's okay. That was kind of a weird thing to say, Micah. That sounded a little transphobic, Micah.
Well,
I know what you're talking. We know what you mean. English is incredibly imprecise.
Yeah, they are human
so
beings.
What you said is not what was in your head.
Yeah,
it is okay.
Anyway, like get to know somebody in person. Whether we're talking about like anyone really in the LGBTQIA community, because then you'd start to humanize somebody that maybe you've never even thought of as a human, and you don't even realize. I think that's a big thing for a lot of people, is like I didn't realize how I dehumanized people in that community because I'd never met one. So like,
Yeah.
I didn't understand like some of the biases and really toxic things I thought about them until I like would get to know them and realize, man, like all of those, like they are just a human being. And I think there's also this
it's just
fear,
another way of being human.
yeah, like there's also this fear of like, oh, but if I start like accepting that, like when does it stop? And there's lots of like accusations. I don't even want to get into some of the accusations because we need to wrap up our time.
We can wrap up our time. People will go into things like, at what point does it end? And the answer to that is, like, people will bring up things that are really weird, like pedophilia and stuff. Like, that's not anybody's goal. Everybody's goal is just, like, that is a legitimate, like, personal identification. That is completely different to something like that. Like,
it's not even the same category.
So far, like, it's not in the same category. It's so far removed that the comparison is ridiculous.
It is like there's a difference between
anybody who says that. You can just ignore them and walk away from that conversation, or push back on them if you're a debate bro. But like, that person is in a mind state where they're not going to understand that conversation if you try to have it with them, like, and you're not super well versed in these sorts of things. But I had something in my head that I was going to say that felt like a really, I was going to say, if you want to know how to become more involved in that community and like be more supportive of them, go to a gay pride festival, or honestly, activism is not only super important to people. Like, that is how they have earned, like, that is how people in the LGBT community have gotten their rights so far, is through activism. And so if you think that it's important, then being an activist is a good way to do that. And you don't have to go around knocking on doors, but like going to be another person in a, like a gay pride festival, or like a march or something like that, being part of that community. You will meet so many people, and you may not be ready for that, and that is okay. You don't have to be an activist right now.
But it's good to it would be a good way to kind of expose yourself and like see their humanity, hear some of their stories, and then they're not just an idea that people have talked about, like they're actually people now standing in front of you.
It's probably one of the best ways for you to enter that community but that's a really important, not only like a really important social action to take, but it is a great way to get to know people who can expand your worldview. Or you can, go work in a restaurant in a downtown area in a big city, because you will just meet a lot of people who do not conform to the worldview that you were taught. You just like don't avoid situations where you think that you might come into contact with somebody that maybe growing up you were taught was doing a bad thing or was wrong or whatever with their with who they are. Just any opportunity that you have to expand your worldview is fine. It's great. And some people are going to live in like rural cities where they don't have that kind of exposure. That's also okay. You don't have to move to a big city. We also need people in those areas who just are accepting of people and can help build society in those communities where people can feel safe in those areas. Because I don't know if you could hear Pearl in that.
Yeah, a little bit. That's fine.
We need like the more space that we can have for people to feel safe in their identity is great. So that's going to apply differently to everybody, because the way that I'm talking right now is like the way that if you live in a big city, you can take part in like a gay pride event or whatever. That's probably not going to be too difficult to find. But I would say that's probably the best way to do it. That aside from like the personal educating stuff, like if you want to meet people, that's honestly the best thing that I can recommend. Yeah,
and don't just educate yourself from a bunch of cishet white dudes like we always have. Like, listen to the people who actually are in that community, who can tell you their stories, and not just some white dude with power telling you what you're supposed to think, because that's like what society has been like forever, and we don't need any more of that, honestly. So
yeah, and also just question things. If you find yourself thinking something that you think is probably problematic, take it apart. I mean, that's what deconstruction is about, right? You start to question things, and you question everything. So questioning, like, why is it not okay for this person to identify as a woman, or for this person to want to be with this other person romantically? You know, like, if you start asking that question and you ask enough questions, you'll kind of find that those things fall apart. Like, the answers that you were taught to give yourself in those scenarios, they don't hold up.
Yeah.
And so that's just, honestly, that's half of how I got there, because I would have to ask myself, like, what's my real opinion here, or like, what's the thing that I really think about this? And it turned out that I didn't have any good answers for it, so I just became a more accepting person. So
yeah, and not just that like you didn't have good answers, but like the answers that you did have and like looked into were like, yeah, that doesn't actually
right.
hold
I was
much
like
water.
a Christian apologist, debate bro, evangelical guy. Like, it's not that I just went to church sometimes and then deconstructed. It was like I was fully into like the research and everything. Like, I knew like all of the arguments, and I still know all of the arguments, and they don't hold up to the things that I'm talking about. Like,
Yeah.
they do not address the things that they don't actually hold up against the arguments that you're going to hear from somebody who's trans affirming or LGBT affirming in general.
Well, I think that does it for this episode. Thank you for being the co-host with me, Josiah.
Yeah, of course. I'm always happy to come on here and spread my communist propaganda.
Oh goodness, don't say that. People are gonna freak out now. No.
That's right. You guys thought I was just a socialist. No, I'm kidding. I can talk about politics another time if you want me to, because I have a lot of opinions on religion and politics and socialism, stuff like that.
For sure.
But yeah, I don't want to scare anybody off because you brought on a demonic communist onto your podcast, I guess.
Yeah. Just remember, he's a human being. He's my brother, and there's all we're all about humanizing people here, right? So there you go.
What are we, back in the McCarthy era? Jeez.
Yeah. See, I don't even know what you're talking about. So that's a great place to end. So. Anyway, thank you all for listening. Where can people find you anywhere?
Yeah, I'm an author, everybody.
Yeah.
So I actually use a pseudonym. I'm not active anywhere on social media. I have an Instagram page that I haven't updated in a long time.
Yeah.
But it's Reese Ramirez Writes, and I don't write about communism.
How do you spell?
I'm working on.
How do you spell that so people can't find it?
ReeseRamirezWrites.
There you go.
I actually am working on a middle grade book right now. It's in the editing stage, getting close to being able to send it to my beta readers who are in my target audience of like 8 to 12, and then send it off to an agent. The things that I talked about today are not necessarily in that book, but I don't plan on writing, like, I started that writing before I had really gotten fully into this. Like, I was already accepting, but I wasn't as well versed as I am now. And I would like to become more well versed, because there's a lot of things that I don't know, and I might have a lot of people disagree with me on things that I said, and that's okay. I can be wrong, absolutely.
We're all on a journey.
Yeah, but I would like to learn more before making that part of my books, because I would like to properly represent people. This is basically just like a fun sci-fi adventure book for kids.
Nice.
That teaches us about classism.
Yeah.
You know, it had to be part of it.
Oh, of course, of
kidding.
course. Well, we already brought it up. So yeah.
But yeah, Instagram. That's probably the only place. I have a TikTok that I haven't used in a long time. I think that one's Reese Ramirez Writes as well. I would have to look. I don't really use social media as much as I should for a guy who wants to make a living off of books. It's kind of, it's Reese Ramirez Writes on TikTok. I just looked.
Okay, cool. Well, we need to wrap up. So you can always find me at Pondering Together on TikTok. You can find Christian at Truth Voyager and congratulate him on the new baby. And you can also find some of our clips that we post occasionally from our podcast episodes at Morning Ponderings. So thank you all for listening, and hope you all have a great day.
Have a great day, everybody.
All right. Well, I guess we'll do the intro now that we've stopped conversation.
Yeah.
Okay.
She was trying to jump from the table to my desk, or from the couch to my desk.
Yikes. That's not good.
She's extremely needy. Hold on 1 second. Okay. It looked like my computer crashed, but it didn't.
Okay.
That would be unfortunate.
That would be.
We're about 30 minutes into this.
Yeah.
Where was I? The gay agenda.